I'm going to move into brain-gut connection with that as a baseline. So again, the alpha-synuclein seeds that we've been talking about will move from cell to cell through the brain and cause the pathology to move from the lower brain stem up into the more generalized brain. Recent work, probably over the last decade or so, has shown that these abnormally formed, aggregated, sticky seeds of alpha-synuclein protein are also present in the gut, so they're in the intestines. And there's a fair amount of evidence now that at least in some people with Parkinson's, not sure if it's everybody, that these seeds that form in the gut can actually spread from the intestinal cells via the vagus nerve, which connects the brain and the intestines, and spread up into those lower brainstem structures that we've been talking about. There are actually, if people recall, mad cow disease from a few decades ago with tainted beef in England, it was the same process. A prion protein abnormally folds. You eat beef that has it in it. Whoa, sorry. Goes into the intestines, propagates there because prion proteins actually will force normal prion proteins to misfold and aggregate together. The prion protein goes up into the brain through the vagus nerve and then goes into the brain and just wreaks havoc. We don't know, well, I will tell you that Parkinson's does not transmit in that way, but there's biological evidence for other types of brain diseases going from gut to the brain. Why does this happen in the gut? Well, there is a fair amount of oxidative stress inflammation that can happen in the gut, particularly in disease states or when the microbiome is altered. I'll talk about that in a moment. And so, as I had talked about before, oxidative stress, inflammatory mechanisms will trigger the misfolding of the alpha-synuclein protein. And so for some people, there may be a significant component of Parkinson's disease actually starting in the intestines. And what might drive this oxidative stress in the gut and the brain? What might drive gut and brain inflammation? Well, there's some evidence. It's not really strong yet, but there's some decent evidence that diet can play a significant role. So diet types that might promote neurological disease progression and diet types that maybe would slow it down or prolong the onset. So when we have our food supply, if we process it in some way, it's going to change the food from its natural state where it's most nutritious, most biologically active, and most protective. So the unprocessed food is like picking up an apple, picking it off the tree, picking it up the ground, and just eating it. So that's totally unprocessed for the apple. Minimally processed is if I wash it, I cut it, I cook it, I freeze it, and these are some examples. So fresh vegetables, fruits, nuts, seeds, minimally processed foods. If we take the apple and add some textures to it, add some sweeteners, add some preservatives to it, but the food still predominates. It's still mostly apple. That's called processed. So yogurt, cheese, bread, pasta, things like that are kind of processed foods. And then ultra-processed foods are foods where textures, sweeteners, bulking agents, flavors, preservatives are added, where the preservatives or the food really, it doesn't predominate. It might be more additive than food. And so we're talking about candy, cookies, hot dogs, things like that. This group of actors here, the ultra-processed foods, have been for decades linked to problems that we face, particularly as we age, as we're exposed to them and other things over our lifetime. So gaining weight, having high blood pressure, developing type 2 diabetes mellitus, cardiac disease, cancer, but also in more of the neurological side of things, There are links between ultra-processed foods and having a higher risk for depression and anxiety, insomnia, cognitive changes, and perhaps Parkinson's disease itself. Whereas minimally processed foods, which is, I think most of us wash the apples, so these minimally processed foods, on the other hand, there's a fair amount of epidemiological evidence that high consumption of these types of foods actually reduces the risk for these same neurological entities of mood, sleep problems, cognitive changes, and there is some reasonable epidemiological evidence that these types of diets will kind of prolong the onset and perhaps slow the progression of Parkinson's disease. So there was a really interesting paper published a few years ago by Lori Mishley and her group. She did a mathematical model of progression, taking a 100-point symptom scale, divided it by years of disease presence and some other features to come up with a mathematical expression of Parkinson's disease progression. Does it match what's really happening in the brain? Hard to know, but it was an interesting concept. And she came up with a list of foods that, when consumed daily, a few times a week, were associated with slower progression by her mathematical model of Parkinson's disease in people who had the diagnosis. And lo and behold, fresh fruit, fresh veggies, nuts, fish, olive and coconut oils, wine, which is good, not bottles of it a day, but in moderation, fresh herbs and spices were the statistically significant foods associated with her modeling of slower progression. And guess what was on the other side? The statistically significant group of foods that was associated with faster progression, I think of it as having a cheeseburger with a Coke and a milkshake and French fries, which I'll admit I like that sometimes. So when my son and I go out to a restaurant and have that, we might be making our neurological disease progress a bit. But I found that to be very, very interesting. So that is, I think, a good take-home point. I can't, and nobody on the planet can guarantee that this is exactly right, but it fits with lots of experience, and I don't think anyone's going to have a problem with that type of conclusion. She also looked at probably 50 supplements, and I get asked about supplements all the time. And there are supplements on TV that are very expensive. And so should I use supplements? It was interesting that using her same methodology, none of the supplements, glutathione, et cetera, none of the supplements, vitamins, had any kind of statistical relevance except iron supplements, which were very strongly, actually the most strongly associated with progression, fast progression of Parkinson's. This does not mean you stop using iron supplements. It just means you talk with your doc, do I have an iron deficiency? Do I need iron supplements? If yes, you do it, but maybe you look for multivitamins that don't have extra iron, just in case that is really pathologically relevant. So what I've kind of taken from this, and I've read about this stuff for years, but I really kind of prepped for this talk, and I think I learned a lot, and I'm trying to take it to heart too. But my impression is, I think that Mother Nature knows what she's talking about. I mean, you think about it, plants, fruits have evolved over millennia on this planet, and we've evolved, I'm gonna have to step back, we've evolved with them. And some of these supplements, vitamin E may not have, a capsule may not have a lot of biologically active vitamin E in it, but if you eat a fruit or a plant, you're gonna get biologically active vitamins. So I think that coming back to the diet we eat rather than spending lots of money on the supplements might be a better approach. Now, there might be dietitians that know this field better than I do that don't agree, but that's my take from what I've looked through. Mediterranean diet, we've all heard of it, but very interesting that there is a lot of, again, epidemiological evidence showing an association between adopting a Mediterranean diet and having less inflammatory and oxidative stress markers. And remember, these are some of the key pathological processes in Parkinson's disease, also Alzheimer's and other neurological disorders that cause degeneration. Mediterranean diet has high fiber and water, both of which can help with constipation control. And the Med-Dash diet is the Mediterranean diet with low salt, low sugar, low red meat, low dairy. And then Med-Dash plus leafy green vegetables and dark berries like blueberries, black raspberries, which I've started eating like crazy, is called the Mind diet with ND, referring to neurodegenerative disease. So this is kind of what people may recommend. And there's also an association between the Mediterranean diet and a more natural and healthy gut microbiome. The microbiome, we actually have bacteria and virus that live within our intestines, lots of them, that help us. It's a kind of a symbiotic relationship. Without them, we wouldn't survive. So they provide us multiple approaches to maintaining our health. Lactobacillus and bifidobacterium probiotics are the ones that are most studied and the ones that seem to be the most promoting of good gut health. And they maintain the good bacteria, so to speak, over the bad bacteria in the intestines. They boost our immunity and responses and reduce inflammation. They optimize digestion and absorption of nutrients. They also, a good balance will help us with kind of a balance between nausea and diarrhea and constipation. And this, I think, is a little bit tougher point, but there are some authors who suggest that a good balanced microbiome may also improve our energy, cognition, and mood. I don't doubt it, but I think that's a little tougher point. This is not meant to be memorized by any of us, but this is a paper from last year that looked at all of the clinical trials that are going on for Parkinson's disease. The upper half is disease-modifying therapies to actually slow the progression of Parkinson's. The lower half is symptomatic therapies to try to help with tremor, stiffness, slowness, and other symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Probably 500 or so clinical trials going on right now at the very least. And I've just circled in yellow, upper right there, lactobacillus is actually in a phase 3 clinical trial for disease modification with the idea does do probiotics, reduce inflammation in the gut, reduce inflammation's triggering of alpha-synuclein getting kind of sticky and then moving to the brain. So if we slow that pathological process down at the gut, do we slow down the pathological process in the brain? My current stance is I think that probiotics can be helpful to reduce constipation in Parkinson's. They're probably safe to use long term, but I think more research still needs to be done before we start promoting them for neuroprotection. But
yogurt came up on your screen and it mentions probiotics.
Yogurt has active cultures of multiple types of bacteria. And so eating yogurt will give you depending on the variety that you're using, a large number of varied types of bacteria that are thought to be good for the gut. Okay? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but it appeared on the negative screen.
That's the report of her study.
Okay.
So that's science. So don't know. So my personal recipe for brain health, which I'm kind of getting back to, is Mediterranean diet, leafy greens, dark berries, just water as opposed to other types of liquids that I take in, wine in moderation, trying to get more exercise, trying to get more hobbies and fun in my life, less of the ultra-processed foods, less added sugar and salt, less soda, both diet and regular. We're actually on Dr. Michelli's list of the faster progression, less of the red meat with saturated fat, less stress, which these days, between job and everything else, is tough. But I think that's a pretty good recipe for brain health based on what we know so far. Okay, thanks.